We are recording. So our first question is, the tissue in a plant that conducts water and nutrients from the roots up into the plant is called the xylem. That is true. Our second question is, the tissue in the plant that conducts water and glucose, which is the carbohydrates that are made from photosynthesis, down the plant into the roots is called the phloem. True or false? That is true. So remember, xylem goes up, phloem goes down. Xylem in the cross-section diagram that I sent you is always in the center in that diagram, and the phloem is further out. So that's pretty easy so far. A plant with one seed leaf is called a monocot, a philodendron, or poison ivy.
Monocot.
It's a monocot. So if you think of nothing else, always look at the word and see if there's a suffix or a prefix that gives you a hint. So mono means one. Monocots are the ones with the parallel veins that do not cross each other. They're not netted. They're generally grasses. They're not broadleaves, so they're a single simple leaf. So if you think of a wheat, wheat, lawn grass, brome, onions, lilies, those are all monocots because they all have a single parallel, they have parallel veins and a single simple leaf that does not turn into a broadleaf. A plant that has two seed leaves with netted veins is called wheat, onion, or a dicot.
Dicot.
That's the dicot. So I kind of flipped the answers around on you. Where the dicot has the netted vein, those are your broadleaf plants. So you think of the sunflower, your rose, your apple. If you look at those veins and those leaves, they are all netted and they have a totally different structure. Also with the dicot, di meaning two. And so that's also a seed that you can split. They also have two seed leaves in a dicot. Okay. This binomial nomenclature category is used to discuss different species with general related characteristics. One example is Asteraceae, the sunflower or aster, cousins, family, or kingdom?
Family.
Family.
Family. So a lot of your families end in ACE, ACEAE, or AEA in general. So that's a little bit of another little trick to help you. Blank is a tool that allows the user to determine the identity of plants or animals. A dichotomous key, an atlas, or a dictionary.
Dichotomous key.
Okay, correct. Dichotomous key, where you have your first question and it gives you two options. That's why we call it dichotomous, because it has two. So you answer the first one and it sends you down a different path until it gets you down to what you're looking for. So that's a dichotomous key. We use it in plants, but it's also used in the animal kingdom as well. As we discussed in general terms, no change or alteration in the environment happens without some type of consequences in the same environment. True or false? True. So if something changes, such as the shade on a tree gets larger as the tree grows and it casts a larger shadow, then it's going to change the environment. Elaine, I'm going to pick on Elaine Pyle here, that's here in class today from Scotts Bluff. Their neighbors had a lot of trees in their yard next to them. And so she planted hostas. Well, when the next person came in and bought the property, they ended up taking out the trees, and her hostas didn't fare so well because they're in bright shade, or bright sun, because that doesn't work. Okay, so I have a couple people that are needing help getting in. I apologize. I'm trying to get people, I'm resending their links. So I'm going to send that. I'm going to get this sent off. Any questions about our quiz tonight? That wasn't too terrible, was it? The quizzes are not intended to be torture. Does that make sense? It's just for you to remember some important pieces related to what we are doing in class and why it's important. And I think that's what is so fascinating, because we do 10 questions a class. We have all kinds of questions at the end. If so, we do 10 classes, 10 questions a class, 19 classes, 190 questions I've asked you. That's pretty good. And then you don't have to take your final at the end if you will do your questions. So that makes it easier. Okay, so we got through the quiz, and I will learn how to do a better job with everything related to Google Classroom. I'm getting there. I'll get better with it. So it's okay. So what we're going to work on next is we're going to work on the publications that were part of this. And then so I'm pulling it up on Google Classroom. Any observations? I didn't want to make it something torturous that was difficult. Just these are things that are important for everyone to remember and to utilize. So I'm excited that people were doing really well on the quiz. So I'm happy with that. We have the publications from Iowa State Extension. The first one we're going to talk about. So if you want to pull that one up first, and we'll talk about that. So here we go. And for those who have the Google Classroom Suite, this works great. Otherwise, this is why I sent you the pieces ahead. So this is what we're going to do. Okay, so this is the Growing Community Trees program that Iowa State did a publication on. And for those in the classroom, they had the handout. So what Jeff Isles, the author, is talking about here is talking about the basic pieces that make plants have a fighting chance of surviving. That's really, really important, because we have a tendency to see things that did not work. We've had that wonderful phenomena of the knee-jerk purchase. How many of you went in and saw something at a store and you just had to have it without a plan in the world what to do with it? That is exactly what retail wants you to do. They want you to fall in love with something and take it home. And it's one of those situations where you really need to know, do you have the space for it? Do you have the environment for it? Will it work? And this is where basically we're going over the concept of the right plant in the right place in the right environment. So that's what this publication is about. And what we need is we need to have enough adequate space. The first concept is to have enough space for that plant to grow to its full potential without a terrible amount of interference that would stunt the ability for that plant to grow. So that is our first paragraph here. So one, we think about height and width. You see a little small tree at a greenhouse or a nursery, and it's going to be so easy to want to put it right up against the house, which I've seen those. I've seen that example where, oh, it looks so cute, but it's so small, and I'm just going to put it right here next to me. And I hope that that wasn't a 70-foot tree. But that happens because our eyes do trick us. So when we look at especially woody species such as trees and shrubs, we always have to measure out how much space, how much height and width for the canopy for sure, that we have space so it's not running into a building, it's not running into other trees, because I've been into examples of looking at landscapes where trees were planted too close that were in a home landscape situation, not a windbreak, a home landscape where literally the canopies of the plants were literally growing into each other like this. And that stunted them, and one was taken out. Well, the other side of the plant that did survive, that you did keep, is naked on one side because it's all been mishmashed together. Well, there's really no coming out of that. That's a done deal. So when we look at plants, we always want to make sure, do we have enough width to not run over everything around it? And is it going to be tall enough? If we are thinking about an example such as street trees, which are put in our parking area between the sidewalk and the street, or in an island, or under power lines, you've got to know, is there enough growth space for that plant to go to its ultimate potential? That's one of the most important things. Also, is making sure that there's enough space for a root system, which is just as important as the canopy, because we always think about the top growth, but a root system, especially on a tree, is very extensive. It's not a carrot that's going to go straight down. It's going to go out quite a ways. So we also want to make sure that there's enough room for a root system to be able to grow out and spread. And if we're in a real compacted area with compacted soils, that cuts down a lot of your oxygen, carbon dioxide exchange for the root systems, which will really hurt the life of the plant and make it struggle too. So it's really important. The next piece is our sufficient light, making sure that we have enough light to go through photosynthesis. And you will see on a lot of our information whether a plant is something that is going to need full sun, which we think of 8 hours of direct sun, part sun, which is basically 6 to 4. Some plant materials will take filtered sun, which will do it, or you're going to have that little hosta that's going to need some shade and some protection because it doesn't want to be out in the full sun. So we always got to match where we're going to put the plant materials, and we're wanting to group them together. So Elaine, in her example, was grouping the hostas in a planting because the shade effect from the neighbor was so great. The new neighbor came in and bought the property and took the trees down, which opened up the canopy and baked the hostas on accident. So, you know, that's something we got to think of. So that's the next thing. Another piece that we talk about, if you've been in class with me in the past, is sufficient water. And watering is one of the major factors that will make or break you in the landscape or inside with houseplants. Either it's too much or too little. And it really depends also with the soil type and the ability for the soil type or the potting media's ability to drain. And so we want to make sure what is adequate in one space will be different than adequate somewhere else. And I do have a question here, so I'm going to answer it. Surprisingly, the hostas are doing well. And then quite surprised in that. And sometimes, Elaine, if there's enough protection in another direction in the environment, you can kind of cheat. Sometimes, for the example of a hosta, there's enough other shade and protection around it that it's not a total death sentence, but it's a good example of one where the environment changed on us, and so we have to adjust. So when we talk about watering, that's a big factor because we need to think about water infiltration. And that is a simple little process. Go get a empty coffee can and cut the bottom out of it and shove it into the ground, fill it up with water, and time how long it takes for that water to infiltrate that can. From a full can, drains down, and that will help. If we have a heavier clay soil or a compacted soil, water does not move down, it moves in sheets. And it makes a really slow, zigzagging pattern down in general. How many of you have ever been in an area where there's heavy clay and you had a cloud burst? The water doesn't go down, the water runs somewhere else, goes in the ditches. Especially where I grew up in Northeast Kansas, where there was lots of clay, where it would pool and it would not go down. It would just go off into the ditches or spread out. And then after the rain, it got hot and dry, and then you get big old cracks in the ground. So that's what happens is water travels differently with the different type of soil that you have. So clay soils or compacted soils are just going to make a sheet, and they're going to want to go this way. They're wanting to go horizontal. They're not going to go down very easy. It's going to take time. On the opposite end, you have sand. Sandy soils, especially along Lake McConaughey, we get calls for landscapes, the lake houses. The water goes literally down, and it goes down in a very pointed V shape. It goes down very quickly because there's nothing to hold it. The space between the particles and the soil is very large, and so that water just drains right down. So our happy medium is our silt and loam combinations. They may have some sand, which would make it drain a little quicker, or we would have a clay loam, which would hold more moisture. So it would take it a little longer. And that is the more general wide U-shape type of drainage where it moves slowly down kind of in a U shape. So if you think of a flat line for clay moving this way, horizontal, water and clay and soils that have silt and loam are more of a U shape, wide U shape, and pure sand is a V, goes straight down. So those are some really important things to remember. So people will ask, well, how long do you need to turn your sprinklers on for your lawn, for example? It depends on how fast your water percolates through your soil to get to your root system. That really tells you how much water you need. So the test for it, for example, is to take a hand trowel, a little hand shovel, shove it in the ground, pull it towards you, and you'll see your root zone. And if your watering is going through the root zone and a little ways past on your, how many minutes you have it timed, then you've adequately watered your entire root zone. So you always water so the water goes down another ½ inch to an inch deeper than your root systems are. So it's not a quick and easy, oh, just turn it on 30 minutes. You need to know your soil type. That will impact your water. So the next one is atmospheric pressure and factors. And we talk about respiration where the plants are pulling in the carbon dioxide and the light source to go through photosynthesis and respirate out. The one problem is, have you ever been in an area that is hot and humid that never cools off in the evening? You see the trees like on city campus or East Campus in Lincoln, they look like wet dish rags. They're just kind of like dangling here. What is happening, it's not cooling off. That is an atmospheric stressor that is, the plant is respirating out fast and it's not becoming turgid. It's no longer solid. It's limp because it's respirating everything out that it had. So that's why trees are stressed during really hot, humid days during the summer. And we see that especially on the eastern side of the state where we have a lower elevation, higher humidity levels. But our blessing on the western half of the state, especially as we go further into the panhandle, we have a nice general climb. It's not a big mountain we're climbing, it's just a gentle slope going west, just like you would in South Dakota as you go towards the Black Hills. The elevation's going to climb nice and gentle most of the time, and you're going to see a difference. Well, it cools off in the evenings, and that allows our plant materials to repair, and the respiration level goes back to normal. Even on a hot day where it cools down a little bit, we get that 10 degree difference is what is the big factor. And so our plants don't respirate out as fast in general terms. I'm not saying it's foolproof, but there's a tendency to do that. Then we have what we call our mineral and our soil reactions. And these are the pieces with our soil testing and our nutrient levels. So we talk about macronutrients. Those are your big three. When you see a bag of fertilizer, you have three numbers side by side by side. And one is nitrogen. Your middle one is phosphorus, and your third one is potassium. And we call that NPK. So if you hear me talk about NPK, those are your three macronutrients. Those are your big nutrients that we use in higher quantities. They are found in nature in higher quantities than our micros. And those are the ones that we are usually adjusting with our soil test. The biggest nutrient that we face that we have to replenish is nitrogen. So that is the one that dissipates the fastest out of the three. We have, in general terms, we generally have adequate potassium in western Nebraska, western South Dakota. In sandier soils, we tend to be a little short on potassium or on phosphorus. So that middle number where we may have to amend with phosphorus, depending on your soil test results, the sandier soils tend to have less phosphorus, and phosphorus tends to bind up and is not available. So when we're doing that soil test, we will talk about this in the soils section of the nutrients and when they're available and how we make those recommendations. But this is a good segue into that. So different plant materials require different amounts of nutrients. And so there is some variation. Generally, if we pick plants that are adapted to our region, they're also generally adapted to the type of nutrients in our soils. So that's a benefit. Unless we bring something that's a little bit more exotic in, and the nutrients are going to be different and the pH level needs are going to be different. So we have to do a lot of amending. And the next part is the soil pH, which is your acidity level. We have a scale from 0 to 14 is our pH scale. 0 is the most acidic side, and you go clear over to the other side of 14, which is alkaline, which is the opposite. So how many of you have ever heard of the term of a sweet soil? A sweet soil or a sour soil? Sour soils are usually acidic soils. Sweet soils are generally alkaline soils. In general terms, for our region, we are more alkaline. We are over 7.0 quite a bit of the time. Now, a lot of our plants would produce better at 7.0 to 6.5. So we'd like to go a little bit on the acidic side. And so we need to do some amending to our soils, adding over time, building up organic matter helps drop that pH down. Adding sulfur in helps drop that pH down. It breaks that down. What it does, when we have a lower pH, those plants can pull in all those little micronutrients that we're talking about, which are molybdenum, zinc, copper, manganese, iron, boron, and chlorine. It is very rare for a homeowner to change the micronutrients around in your soils. The slightest adjustments could throw your balance completely out in a home landscape. So we very rarely touch micronutrients in a home landscape. The ones that we do work on are your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. But this does give you a good description of pH and where the different types of nutrients are available. And we will talk about that more in depth in our class on soils. But in general terms, we are above 7.0. We have had pHs that I have read clear up to 8.5, which is fairly alkaline for most landscape plants. And so there's a reason why blueberries don't grow here naturally, or beautiful blue hydrangeas don't grow here naturally, partially because they need a very acidic soil. And so that has to be managed and worked down. And that is not a fast process. That is a very slow process. So that's why people struggle with certain landscape plants, even if the box stores such as your Lowe's, Menards, Walmart, Home Depot supply them. So every spring in May, we get beautiful azaleas. Azaleas have seen many slow, painful deaths here out in our region because they're just not a great match because of our high pH soils don't work and for them to be successful. Though I do have to say, we do have people in this region that do grow hydrangeas, but there are a couple different cultivars such as Limelight and Annabelle that are more tolerant to the higher pH. So then it becomes a plant selection choice. And then of course, it's going to take some further maintenance. So my question that I usually pose to people is, what level of maintenance do you want in your landscape? Do you want something that you can plant that is well adapted, that doesn't require lots of care? Or is it something you really want that is going to take the more care and more higher maintenance and probably some micromanagement? We have some people that like to micromanage, and they have done it to get those blue hydrangeas to bloom. But it's a constant piece of work. It's a constant maintenance throughout the season. These aren't plants that are grow and walk away. So if you want something like grow and walk away, plant something that is more adapted here and get it to start and thrive, and then it usually takes off. We do have a question here in the classroom. Okay, yes. Mhm. The question is, do coffee grounds or vinegar add or help drop the pH? It will in combination. You can throw your coffee grounds and make compost. Compost tends to be a lower pH as it breaks down through that chemical process. You can incorporate it into the soil. It's going to be a slow process, but it'll sure aid it. So that'll help it. So you will see products that will be for acid-loving plants, and there will be some sulfur in there and some other compounds. What it does, sulfur gets in contact with your soil, it gets wet, and it turns into sulfuric acid, and it drops the pH down. Then your roots on your plants can pull up the iron, the copper, the manganese, all these little trace micronutrients that are in the soil. They're there, they're present, they're just not available because the pH is not at an optimal range. So. Yes, we had a question, is that something that you continuously develop? And the answer is yes. And we do have, for instance, I have a publication from Purdue University Extension I can show you tonight that talks about how you treat small areas around a planting to make it go down. So we do have those cases where we do that. So it's always good to arm you with that kind of information. So, okay. So the next one is the appropriate temperatures. And this goes back to our planting zones. It's really important to plant materials that are going to fit in our zone. North Platte right here, we're on the edge of 4 and 5. And so a plant that is a zone 4, 3, 2, or 1 are going to do okay here, especially 4s and 3s. So depending on where you are with your planting map will allow you to do some selection. So that does make a difference. There is this discussion here in the article that we can have a lot of changes on one side of the plant versus the other, depending on where the sunlight is. Sometimes as much as a 40-degree difference on the side that gets hit by the sun versus the side that doesn't. And Michigan State Extension even has talked about a 60-degree difference on one side or the other. And you know, we have those days in the winter where you'll have weather in the 70s. And you'll have 1 or 2 days that are absolutely beautiful, warm, wonderful. And then we'll get a cold snap. And I don't know about you, but here in our region, right here in these surrounding counties, we're going to have a big drop from in the mid 40s down to a high of 17 on Saturday and negative 25 wind chill. That's what causes a lot of breakage on our woody plants and our shrubs. Our trees and shrubs, because they're dormant and then they get warm on those warm days and they start to come out of dormancy. And then we get hit with something like this cold snap. And what happens is they break out of dormancy and we get a cold snap, and it's a long sustained one, or it's sharp enough of a difference where it shatters the plant cell structures, and we'll start to see what we call frost crack start on trees and shrubs. And usually it's on that south side where it warmed up on the one side, wherever the sun hit, where it's nice and warm, and then we get that horrible cold blast, and that's where you usually see the crack. So that happens a lot. That's probably one of the reasons why we struggle with soft-wooded species, which include a lot of our fruit trees, have a tendency to split really easy. And so they pop out of dormancy easy, and then they get nailed. So it can be a real challenge. We also talk about the importance of what's around that plant material with the temperature. So if you have a metal building, the light's going to hit it. It's going to radiate heat off of it. Or, you know, the metal building's the prime example, but a home where I have a microclimate on the south side of my house, which has a protected area by the porch, that stays nice and warm. And it's a little microclimate that keeps things warm and it never truly goes dormant. But don't ever plant an apricot on the south side of a building, because the heat that radiates off that building teases that apricot, which already wants to go break dormancy early, gets nailed by a frost. And that's why people struggle to get apricots, for example. So we always got to know our plant materials and when they want to break dormancy as a general rule of thumb. And then where is it in relation to everything in the environment? Is it a building that's going to provide shade or protection or a microclimate, or is there warmth going to radiate off of it? If you plant something on a slope, when the light hits it on a slope, will make a difference. So little tricks like that, you can manipulate your landscape with the hard structures, meaning buildings, and the sidewalks, because the heat radiating off of driveways, sidewalks, and streets and roads will also impact the plants as well. So you can impact that really good. So it's really kind of interesting. We talk about, you know, being acclimated, and we talk about all the bedding plants that come way too early at our box stores because everyone's wanting to get the first purchase in. That's something that we need to harden. And we talked about hardening a little bit in class previously, and that is a process of buying. In the case of bedding plants, you buy the bedding plant, And then you're going to take it out during the day in a protected area and you're going to bring it back in. Put it in a protected area outside and be nice and sunny. You're going to let it get acclimated to the wind. You're going to make it tough enough because if they come right out of the greenhouse, they're going to be pretty soft. So it's making them toughen up a little bit, but you're going to pull them back in at night, whether that means in your garage or if you're going to put them in your home, and then you're going to take them back out. Do that for a 2-week time frame that acclimates those plants so you can plant them permanently in the garden or in the landscape, and they're not going to go through the transplant shock that's so devastating. So, and a lot of times we tend to plant when the soil is too cool. We will talk about that in soils as well, is using that soil thermometer or finding out our soil temperature data across the state will help you to decide when to plant in general terms on different types of things. So we talked about using the sign of the moon and the tides with your Farmer's Almanac, and that generally tends to work pretty good. That follows right along. So if you haven't used that, that's something that maybe you go get a copy of the Farmer's Almanac and do some reading, and it follows the tides and about nature's processes. So when we talk about planting potatoes, for instance, the old rule of thumb is Good Friday. Depending on the Farmer's Almanac, that adjusts from year to year because of the tides and the atmosphere, because some years we have an early Good Friday and some years we have a later one. But if you compare it with your soil temperatures, they match up pretty close. So it's kind of a neat example to work with. And the Farmer's Almanac can be a great tool, and they're not that expensive. It's a good thing to buy and to learn and to read from. So it helps. The other considerations are wonderful. People pressure, that means, is there going to be a lot of traffic? Meaning, you're going to have dogs in the backyard that's going to run along the fence and compound the ground down? Or is it a schoolyard where there's going to be lots of activity of people walking around? Or is it a park? Or is it people like to park vehicles under trees? Our forester here, Rachel Allison, would get really mad with construction crews because they want to park under the trees because you get the shade. When you do that, you compact the soil, and you're always compacting and causing stress on the root system of a plant. So people see it for shade, and she is saying you're messing up the root system. But we do have a lot of human interactions, and my observations are, if you're going to have a lot of high traffic with people and vehicles and equipment and stuff, it's got to be some pretty tough plant materials to survive that. Also, we need to be able to survive the mower crews or the weed eaters. And I can rat my 84-year-old father out, for example. I've got a perfect example to tell you what not to do. He's one of those that loves to ride his riding lawnmower. And he had planted a tree for my mother, which she had went out and did everything correctly, except for she didn't put a mulch ring down. And by gosh, he was getting all the grass around that tree, but he was not getting off that lawnmower. Ended up skidding the tree. And you know from our diagram, when you start cutting the xylem and the phloem on the side of the tree, the ability to move water and nutrients in that damaged area is gone. It's gone for good. That does not repair itself. So that becomes a real problem. And of course, he asked me, what should I do? And I said, well, you go buy mom a new tree. And I got a really nasty answer from that too. But the point is, you got to keep the string trimmers and the mowers away from running over roots and keeping them away from the trunks of trees. It's really, really important. So we don't want to plant a tree so deep that the roots want to heave up and come up off the surface. If we have a heavier clay soil, for instance, you're going to plant that tree a little bit more shallow than you would normally, You always look for the root flare on a shrub or a tree. So you have the main stem or the trunk. It's going to go straight down. Then it's going to start to pull away. That pull away part needs to be above the soil level for sure. In a heavy clay soil, you end up planting a little shallower because that soil is so heavy to navigate through for all those roots. And if you water a lot with a sprinkler system and that ground is soggy, those roots are going to pop up because they don't want to suffocate in the extra water. So for all those people that water 15 minutes every day, what that does is it makes the roots heave up, especially in a clay soil. So, but that is all that we have here that we're going to talk about from this publication, but it's really good. This is really good related, especially to trees and shrubs, because we have a horrible time of messing up trees and planting them. But these are also the factors that go along with our grass and our herbaceous plants, such as the hostas, the tulips, the things that are going to die down and then come back up again, as well as our annuals that we're going to put in the landscape. So we are at 8 o'clock. Do you want to take a short break and get your coffee, go to a bathroom break, and then we'll reconvene? Does that sound okay? So let's put on the timer for 10 minutes and we'll be back. So in these examples of weather-ready landscapes, you have the proactive side where you can tell people to plan ahead, knowing that we're going to have some of these factors. And then on the flip side is what we call corrective action. That's what you're going to do after the event comes through. And we had these ironically ready for, of all cases, the 2019 bomb cyclone. They had just been put up on the website and just started to be distributed once May 13th, 2019 hit. That was the bomb cyclone that flooded a good chunk of Nebraska. On the east end and west end got the blizzard. So we were able to tell county offices and emergency response systems, this is what you do to help people when the landscape gets flooded or gets blown out with a bad storm. So the next one is drought, because we're always going to be worried about drought here in the state, especially on the west side, where areas where we're going to get under 10 inches of precip a year. And we can go clear down to about Nebraska City and get about 36 inches at the other end. But on the other end, that soil has a heavy clay content. And remember, clay soils don't absorb moisture very easy. And an old agronomist that was very wise in giving recommendations to all the new educators in Kansas when I was hired in the late 90s said, Southeast Kansas can get up to 50 inches of precip a year, but we're always 2 weeks away from a drought because our soils do not absorb the moisture very easy. So it's a paradox. Yes, they get a lot of moisture, but our soils in those areas, especially around Nebraska City, for example, or in Southeast Kansas, that soil is so heavy, the water doesn't permeate through. It just goes off, like we talked about, moves in sheets. And then things dry up, and then you get the big old craters in the field, so big cracks. So we talk about drought. We talked about 2012 being our big surprise when it broke dormancy early, it got warm, it stayed warm. We just never got any relief. But we've had some really dry conditions, especially in the Panhandle the last couple of years where we just haven't had the rain. And so this is where we want to make sure that we pick the plants that can deal with that can deal with drouthy landscape conditions, whether you're in a home landscape, whether you're in a acreage, whether you're on a farmstead. You will hear all scenarios as people ask questions. A lot of our tougher plants have really good root systems that keep moisture reserves behind. That's one of the reasons why all the plants in the aster family do well out here, is they've got a great root system that holds those root reserves for those tough times. So everything else is wilting, but plant material in the aster family's got that great root system. They'll hang in there. So that's a good little factoid. Mulching is always good. When we mulch trees, we do not want to mulch deeper than 3 inches deep, and beds no more than 2 inches deep. So we don't want to produce what we call a mulch volcano where we just bury stuff. So 3 inches on trees and shrubs and mulch rings, and then beds no deeper than 2. So we always want to make sure our watering goes at the base of the plant. So we're reducing our evaporation loss and getting that contact, water to soil contact as much as we can, and let that water sink down and absorb into our soils. Once again, knowing how fast does your water infiltrate through your soil. So if you're in a sandy soil, you don't want to water for long periods of time because it's just going to go straight down. So it won't take long for water to go through sandy clay, sandy loam soil. It'll go down. You won't have to water as long. If you are in a clay soil, you're not going to water as you're going to water a little bit. Your strategy is different too. But that is really important to follow out is to know how well your water percolates through the soil. So you don't want to do that too much. We have a question, maybe this question would apply better in a different session, but has anyone had success with notching trees to establish new scaffolds? Fruit trees have been pruned up too high. There are some manipulators, and we can talk about how we manipulate those trees. And people always have questions about pruning fruit trees because that is kind of an art as well as a science. So making sure that they have spreaders so they spread out. But general rule of thumb out here, fruit trees have a narrower branch angle, meaning they're a sharper angled degree. They're not as wind tolerant to storms, so they tend to snap a little easier versus our open angled species where the angles are more open, they will withstand heavy winds. So that's a good thing to bring up. And so the next thing is the evaluate the plant's value in the landscape. And so some things take longer to establish than others. And so what can you do now? What's going to take longer to invest time in? And if you're going to spend some good money on plant materials, you want to take care of them correctly because it is an investment of not only the money to buy it, but the time and the energy to maintain it. And so that's a big one. And then we have pictures of the damage and the corrective corrective actions are avoid the fertilizer because you don't want a lot of soft, weak growth trying to go during a drought. You want to just maintain status quo. You want to make sure that we mulch because mulching keeps the temperature down and that root zone keeps it a little cooler and also helps keep the moisture level a little bit more stable and not so up and down and keeping the soil moist but not soggy. But we also have to make sure that we understand our soils and how well the soil drains when we do water. So it's very important. So these are 2 modules that we have of our examples. So we had a flood one, which was used in 2019 extensively. We're still seeing flood damage on the eastern 2/3 of the state because flood damage, especially on woody trees and shrubs, show up later over time. So that's different than a vegetable garden where you have an immediate impact or your bedding plants are drowned out, they're gone, versus the impact on something that's a multi-year plant. There's frost. There's a nice one on frost damage. There's one on hail, ice. So if we have an ice storm, tornadoes and winds, and then desiccation. So you could pull these up and look at them. There's 8 of them to look through. These are great to hand out at your local extension offices or use at your local Asimart Farmers Market booth. If you have a Master Gardener table, these are great to show those. They're easy for people to understand and just good recommendations all the way around. because the environment does have so many factors. And so we talk about the right plant in the right place and being resilient. But there are times when we have a hail event or a tornado go through that's pretty catastrophic, then what? So we can, we try to control as much of the environment as we can and then do the management productively so we can withstand it. If the tornado rips the tree out, there's nothing more we can do, but we will know better and be able to help out people. So we do get winter desiccation. That's a common one we can talk about every year. We can talk about drought pretty much every year, dormancy breaks and frost. Those are the hot ones. So those are here for you to look at for class. And so you can peruse through those as well. Are you ready to do the student activities? So our group here tonight does not have the screen because someone took our HDMI cord that plugs into our wall projector, but we're going to do the vocabulary game. So the first one is, the question is, a condition in which plants are damaged by low temperatures in the field or storage. Our answers are chilling injury, photoperiod, juvenile stage, or daily light integral. Anyone online have an answer for me? Anyone want to
Chilling injury?
Chilling injury? Okay, let's try it. Yep, you're correct. So it is a condition where the plants are damaged by temperatures in the field or storage. So think about adjusting your crisper in your refrigerator. Sometimes you freeze your stuff, you freeze your produce. That's what happens. The next one is the process by which cold air sinks following downhill to the lowest available point where it accumulates until it's dispersed by heat or wind. Okay, our answers are polyethylene, which is a plastic, air drainage, the root zone, or irrigation. Air drainage. Yep. Okay, our next one. As a condition in which plants are damaged when low temperatures freeze the water in plant tissue. Freezing injury, slope orientation, photoperiod, or irrigation. Freeze. Yep, that's a freeze. Next one, a moist chilling treatment used to break dormancy in seeds or certain plant seeds. Biennial, irrigation, sun scald, or stratification. We're going to
Stratification.
Stratification.
Yes, because some seeds have to be stratified in the treatment before we ever try to grow them. So depending on the crop, and we will find flowers that have to be stratified. We have to stratify them in the cold treatment so they can break dormancy. The next one, a condition in which buds and seeds are inhibited from growing until a certain environment requirement is met. Juvenile stage, degree day, photoperiod, or dormancy. Any hazard? A condition in which buds and seeds are inhibited from growing.
Dormancy,
Dormancy.
dormancy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, a plant in which is a 2-year life cycle with flowering occurring on the 2nd year, followed by plant death. Biennial, root zone, thermoperiod, or sun scald.
Biennial.
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 So think of your Husker red penstemon as a biennial. So when it goes to collect the seeds, so you can get the next crop, because they're not going to live year in, year out. You're going to collect the seeds, plants. Well, what you do is you can cut the seeds off, for example, and trick it, and it'll come back the next year. So you can manipulate that one. So Husker red penstemon can be manipulated if you do not allow it to go to seed. If it goes to seed, you're going to have to collect the seed because the plant's going to die off. So.
Interesting.
All right, so yeah, just funny little factoid. Definition, the required number of heat units that a plant needs to have to reach a certain period of development, usually flowering or harvest. Answer
Degree
is
day.
degree day, so it's called stratification or polycarbonate. And so that one's the degree day. Meaning you have to have so many heat units. We talk about why we can't grow Milo in the western half of the state. We don't have enough degree days or heat units over time because the evenings cool off too fast. Milo as a crop or grain sorghum originally came from Africa that needed the heat during the night. So that's an example of heat period. So. Okay, a type of thermoplastic polymer that can be used as a greenhouse covering.
Polycarbonate.
Polycarbonate.
Polycarbonate, yeah. Polycarbonate is a material that you can use. That works really good. It still allows a lot of your sunlight in, your foot candles in, and it doesn't break down as some of your other, as bad as some of your other materials in a greenhouse. Okay, one of several areas identified across the United States based on average minimum winter temperatures. A nanometer, phototropism, plant hardiness zone, or photoblastic.
Lead hardiness zone.
Hardiness zone.
Yeah, so, that's our 4s and 5s, for example. Kansas begins 6, to give you an idea how far we have to go down to get to 6. A term used in horticulture to mean the day temperature minus the night temperature. Freezing injury, microclimate, degree day, or diff.
Degree day.
Nope, it's the diff, it's the differential. Differential between your daytime and your nighttime temperatures. Usually in our homes, it's 10 degrees and sometimes it's 10 to 15 to 20. It's our diff. So that's a diff. The duration of day length, the amount of light is present, and the relationship between dark and light periods. Plant hardiness zone, photo period, chilling injury, or air drainage.
Photo period.
This is what tricks our plants. This is what initiates the reddening of poinsettias to turn color. They are green until when the conditions are right, photo period kicks in, then they turn dark red or marbled or pink or whatever. That's the same thing that happens with our Thanksgiving and our Christmas cactus based on photo period. Day length, night length. Okay, a characteristic of seeds that have a germination response to the presence or absence of light. Root zone, slope orientation, air drainage, or photoblastic. That's photoblastic.
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 Yeah, there we go. Okay, a condition in which plants are damaged due to heat, cold, humidity, or intense sunlight. Sun scald, degree day, daily light integral, or microclimate.
Sun scald.
Yep. And we will see, how many of you have seen sun scald on tomatoes? How many of you have ever seen the tomato hornworm do its damage? And the big old ugly caterpillars with big horns, and they're out chewing and they chew off different parts of the plant. They can lead to sun scald where they chew off parts of the plant. Also, one of the big problems with blight is the blight causes the leaves to shrivel up and doesn't protect the fruit that's developing, and that can lead to sun scald too. So that's one of the reasons why we fight the blight so much in tomatoes, is because we got to have a little bit of shade because the sun permeates through the plant and then it'll make the fruit turn. Okay, the soil surrounding a plant's roots that serve as a natural reservoir from which the plant draws moisture and nutrients. A photon, a degree day, a root zone.
Root zone.
Root zone, there you go. The physical movement of a plant or its plant parts away from a highlight source. Slope orientation, heat stress, polycarbonate, or phototropism.
Phototropism.
And I've got a cool one of those. I had a Thanksgiving cactus on my windowsill in my new office, and it looks like this in the pot. That's phototropism because it doesn't want to be away from that light source. It's going away. So I had to pull it. So it didn't want to be away. I'll show you. It's kind of a cool example because once it gets itself righted back up, it'll come back. So, okay, the next one is a term used to describe the doubling of reactions as a biological response to increased temperature increments. Chilling injury, Q10, blanching, or a photon. It's the doubling action of biological response to increases of temperature in 10 degrees Celsius increments.
Q10.
That's the Q10.
Q10.
Yep. So it's, it's like an algorithm every 10 degrees Celsius. We don't work with Celsius very much here in the United States. If you're in the UK or Europe, everything's measured in Celsius for air temperature, but that's Q10. So what'd you think of that quiz? Not too terrible bad?
No.
No, not bad. So, okay. Do you want to do the other ones or do you want me to send them on a screenshot? It's 8:46. We can do the light one. If our North Platte Master Gardeners, you guys want to come up, you can look at the diagram. You want to come look at it? No? Okay. So we got these little diagrams here. And it has on here, it has the wavelength from your purple light clear over on here that has really narrow up and down waves. And as time goes on, the waves get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. So the middle one is our visible spectrum. That is the light that we see. It's not purple, it's not red, it's what we see here. And so our wavelengths are measured in, they're in nanometers. So anyone have an idea of ultraviolet light should be over here, right? Clear on the red side. We talk about UV light. And then we have infrared light is clear on the other side. And so we have purple blue light on one end and we have red light on the other end. So when we look at growing lights, they have that pinkish cast or blue cast we call blue light, where you have a mixing of that so your plant nodes don't stretch out so horribly bad. So our wavelength is measured in nanometers. So we have the nanometer from 350 on this side, on our very right side, and then over to 750 clear on the red end. So our incandescent bulbs have a lot of red light to it. So that's why we got to get these blue light bulbs so that wave is shorter. Not up and down squiggly like this, but more of a gentle wave, not this big galloping thing that our heat lamps would give us. A heat lamp gives us these big, ocean waves versus, like a pulse. So, honestly, any thoughts about where we want to put the radio wave versus the X-ray? Does anyone know where that is? Is it on the blue side or the red side? We have a dentist here that says it's on the blue side because she kind of knows it. So it's on the blue side of the spectrum. It's on the blue side of what we see. And then our radio waves are on the red side. So what I'm going to do is I will make this screenshot like I did the flower blossom, and I will put this on email to you and you can see it. So, okay. And here's some good information on tips for drought watering conditions. And yes, it will apply. I have these on chat. And so what I will do is I will send this out with our group. Would that be okay? Winter watering is really important. People just assume we're going to get snow cover and it's going to be fine. But we know we've had enough dry years that that is rough. So we have a comment on UV and ultraviolet. So infrared goes over on the red side and ultraviolet goes over here. Ideally, if you get really heavy ultraviolet light in plants, the internodes are going to be really, really short. So short, we don't want them. That's not ideal. But if we try to grow something under a heat lamp that's got this big ocean wave light wavelength, they're going to stretch out. And so how many of you have tried to grow seeds, plants from seeds under a regular light bulb? Those are the ones that get really stringy, and because they have that big wavelength, they kind of lay over and don't. They're not strong enough. So we got to have that in that ideal middle ground. So, okay, thank you on that, because we are definitely, we cannot see ultraviolet and infrared with our visual eye, but we know it when the light quality is too much to either end of the extreme on what our plants are responding to on if they grow really short internodes and really compact, or if they get really leggy. So we've got to find that middle ground that produces just on the visible spectrum, just a little bit on the blue side. So that's why we have the grow lights. We have the grow bulbs. They're just a little bit, they're not an X-ray, but they're just a little bit off to the side of visible spectrum for us to see. So, and that's what you will see those in different shades. You will see a lot of them are pink in color, especially your LEDs. LED lighting systems are coming into popularity in greenhouses because they give you that right mix of wavelength that we want, and they are much more efficient with electricity. So we have a research greenhouse out here that's growing plants that are tested for spray damage, and that whole entire greenhouse complex has the LED lights. So if you were on the south side of North Platte driving around and you see that purple glow, pink glow in the back of the research farm, that's what that is, from the LED lighting. So, yeah, it's the pink house. It's the spray house, actually. So we're growing plants, and what they do is they grow different types of plants to an optimal growing condition. Then they're going to expose them to different types of treatments with different types of pesticides at different concentration rates, different temperature rates, different wind speeds to see potential damage. So that's what the research is being done out here. So, okay. Any other questions with our group tonight? Any questions that you may have? Helpful, not helpful? A lot of times with these handouts, it's great to show you so you can take these, you can utilize them, we can work through them. So it's like, oh, I didn't know that was here. So this is kind of a show and tell kind of situation. So, but there's not a lot to show you with the outside of, showing you neb guides and the publications and pieces. So our next class is going to be more interactive than what we have tonight, because we're getting ready to believe we're going to go to soils as our next class. And so we are excited to go do that. That's much more fun. And let me go to that list. Let me go to our class. And I will tell you what we've got going on. It makes me switch out of one account to another one to get to the classroom. But I think you will like this much more. The soils one has an activity where we are literally going to do the soil in the jar test, where you're going to do your own sample of soil in a jar with the instructions. And that's going to be one of those cool things that you can do at home and try it and see how how it turns out for you to look at. There are a bunch of videos here. There are 6 videos. Most of them are short length. There's one that's 17 minutes, one that's 12, one that's 2, another one that's 18. The whole lecture for you to watch is 2 hours and 20 minutes. That one's a longer one. I will get this posted tomorrow so you can have it to look at. But we will do the soil in the jar example and that test so you can try it out. And then you can tell me how it turned out and what you observed. So that will be an actual example. So if you can do it at home and try it out with the instructions I give you, I will do an example demonstrating it in class as well. So we can do the examples. So that'll be fun. So anything else for tonight? Anything else that we want to talk about? Any more questions? Got a question. I want to start. Patty, you had a question. I want to start marigolds from seed. So they're ready. So here is a resource that I will send to you again. I don't know if all of our group got it. It is a calendar that tells you how many weeks to go backwards from your freeze date on flowers. So what you do is you look at your freeze date. You're 90% the freeze is not going to happen, and you count the weeks backwards to start your seeds. I can send that to you tomorrow. So would that work? It's actually an Indiana publication from Purdue University, but it's really handy. So look for your average frost-free date, your 10% probability that the frost is going to happen, and then you count your days backwards, your weeks backwards, and that'll help you. So for instance, the freeze date in Valentine is generally right around the 30th of May. North Platte is the 15th of May. It gives you kind of an idea. But I'll show you the graphics on average frost dates in both South Dakota and in Nebraska. I'll send that off. So you'll have that to look through. So, and I'll show you the instructions on how to do soil in a jar. And you guys can do that at home and tell me how it worked. Then we'll talk about it and do one in class and demonstrate it and show you and see how it works in class. So anything else? I will finish the recording here and stop it.